nausea comes back. And I try a new position on the bed with some pillows and slip back into sleep. And I'm walking through this city, not really sure where or why. And I got to piss really bad, and I go down the staircase of a subway or a hotel. Architecture just growing around my moving body like stone vegetation. And I find this old bathroom, mostly metal stalls and shadows like the subway station toilets of my childhood. And I could sense sex as soon as I walked in. The moist scent of it and the yellow light and the wet tiles and concrete. And I go into the stall and I pull out my dick and I start pissing into the toilet. And a big section of the stall's divider is peeled away. And I see this guy in his late teens, early 20s, jerking off watching me. And when I finish, I reach through the partition and feel his chest through his shirt. And he zips up and comes into my stall, comes around into my stall and closes the door and leans against it with his hands on his thighs. And I unzip his trousers and I peel him down to his knees. And I roll up his shirt so I can play with his belly. And when his pants are down at his knees, I notice a fairly large wound in one of his thighs. Lots of scrapes and scratches on his body. The wound does something to me. I feel vaguely nauseous, but he's sexy enough to dispel it. He pulls down his underwear and leans back again like he wants me to blow him. And I crouch and I start slowly licking under the base of his prick. And the wound is close to my eye, and I notice this series of red and green and yellow wires, like miniature cables looping out of it. Then there's these two chrome cables with sectioned ribs pushing under the sides of the flesh. And then this blue glow coloring the air above the wound. I stop looking and I look closer. I see it's a tiny miniature monitor, a tiny black and white television screen with an even tinier figure gesticulating from a podium in a vast room. There's the current president, smiling like a corpse in a vigilante movie, addressing the nation on a live controlled broadcast. And the occasion is an enormous banquet in Washington, a cannibal banquet attended by heads of state and the usual cronies, Kirkpatrick and her biological warfare husband, the Pope seated next to Buckley and his sidekick Buchanan, and Oliver North's part of the entertainment. And he squats naked in a spotlight in the center of the ballroom floor, and a small egg pops out of his ass and breaks in two on the floor, and a tiny American flag tumbles out of the egg, waving mechanically. And the crowd breaks into a wild applause as Whitney Houston steps forward to lead a rousing rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. And I wake up in a fever so delirious I'm in a patriotic panic. Where the fuck at 5 o'clock in the morning can I run and buy a big American flag? My head hurts so bad I gotta get out of bed and stand upright in order to ease the pressure. And I go to the bathroom and I finally, after a fucking week, I throw up. And I come back into the room and I yank open the window and I lean out above the dark empty streets and scream, "There's something in my blood and it's trying to fucking kill me!"
Good evening. Thanks for being here tonight. My name is Megan Hoyer. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Public Engagement here at the Whitney, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to tonight's program, Memories That Smell Like Gasoline, reading David Wojnarowicz, which is organized on the occasion of the brilliant, necessary, and all too timely exhibition upstairs on the 5th floor, David Wojnarowicz, History Keeps Me Awake at Night. David once wrote that, quote, "To make the private into something public is an action that has terrific ramifications." The power of this idea is most profound in his writing Activism and Art Around the AIDS Crisis, and tonight's event is also a collaboration with Visual AIDS.
Hello, I'm Alex Fiallo. I'm the Programs Director at Visual AIDS. Because AIDS is not over, Visual AIDS is the only organization that uses the power of art to provoke dialogue around HIV and AIDS, support HIV-positive artists, and preserve the legacies of artists lost to AIDS. It's been powerful for the visual AIDS community to see so much of David Wojnarowicz's visual art in the context of the Whitney retrospective. Alongside his work as a visual artist, David Wojnarowicz was a prolific and influential writer. In particular, the urgency of Wojnarowicz's writing about the AIDS epidemic as a social and political crisis in the United States and beyond has had a lasting impact on artists and activists. We were happy to work with the Whitney on this program devoted to Wojnarowicz's writing and to animate the politics, sex, anger, and activism of his texts.
So taking the title from his final collection of stories, Memories That Smell Like Gasoline from 1992, this program brings together an intergenerational group of artists and writers to highlight the passion and rage of his singular voice. We want to acknowledge Amy Shoulder, who worked with David as an editor and was steadfast in her commitment to his writing, resulting in the publication of Memories That Smell Like Gasoline. We also want to thank the editors and publishers of all of Wojnarowicz's publications, and if you our bookshop has done an amazing job sourcing many things that have been out of print, getting them back in print, bringing them all together, and there's a selection right outside the theater in case you don't have them all already.
Thanks from Visual Aids to everyone at the Whitney, including Megan Hoyer and Isabel Dow for tonight's collaboration, David Breslin and David Keel as co-curators of this necessary exhibition, Sasha Wartzel, Madison Zalapany, and Justin Allen for their collaboration with us as a community partner at the Whitney. And we also want to thank PPOW Gallery for all of their support of tonight's program, their work with David's estate over many decades, and also their support of Visual Aids.
And I want to say thank you on behalf of the Whitney to Visual Aids, especially Alex, his colleagues Kyle Croft and Esther McGowan, and the incredible community that the organization sort of supports and brings together. I also want to acknowledge James Wensey, who graciously gave us permission to share the opening clip of David. The full audio recording of that reading is included in the exhibition, and the video is available on Vimeo. And I also need to acknowledge Marian Skamama, who has generously given us permission to share her footage of David, which you'll see a bit later on. And I just want to plug that on September 23rd at 7 p.m. we'll be screening Marian's film, made over the last 20 years, Self-Portrait in 23 Rounds, a chapter in David Wojnarowicz's life. We screened it in July, and it was amazing. So if you didn't get a chance to see it, you will in a couple of weeks. And we are above all grateful to the artists who are here tonight as readers, but also as interpreters and interlocutors and friends. We're going to briefly introduce them now in the order that they'll read in.
So first up, Jack Waters and Peter Cramer are performance and media art collaborators since 1981 and founders of the community garden Les Petits Versailles and nonprofit Allied Productions Incorporated, which will be featured in the Friendly Fires section of this month's New York Art Book Fair. In 1984, David Wojnarowicz's work of a Molotov cocktail made from a night train liquor bottle was included in the nationwide exhibition Artists' Call Against U.S. Intervention in Central America, on display in New York City at ABC No Rio, where Cramer and Waters were then co-directors. In 2010, they participated in protests organized by Art Positive in New York City and Washington, D.C. against the removal of Wojnarowicz's A Fire in My Belly from the exhibition Hide-Seek, Difference in Desire in American Portraiture at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. They'll perform a sonic tribute with John Michael Schwartz and Mike Cacciatore as their band Nyobs.
Carmelita Tropicana became a writer-performer at the WOW Cafe in the 1980s and has since received awards and fellowships, including a Guggenheim, the Creative Capital Award, and an Obie for performance. In 1990, as part of the Decade Show, she and David Wojnarowicz performed on the same evening. She considers his performance one of the most powerful and poignant that she has experienced, with an end that made the audience take a deep collective breath before breaking into thunderous applause.
Camilo Godoy is an artist based in New York with an upcoming session in November at Recess and a solo exhibition in February 2019 at Q. In 2014, after the death of his father, Godoy spent time at Fales Library for comfort and inspiration, touching and reading the journals of David Wojnarowicz. His reading is accompanied by a live performance by violinist Scott Moore.
Timothy DuWhite is a writer, poet, playwright, performance artist, and activist. In David Wojnarowicz's work, he is comforted to see another artist using multiple mediums to unpack the devastation of HIV and AIDS.
Chitra Ganesh is a visual artist who lives and works in Brooklyn. Her exhibition, Her Garden, A Mirror, opens at the Kitchen next Thursday, September 13th. As a young queer growing up in 1980s New York, David Wojnarowicz's work, especially Close to the Knives, was and continues to be close to her heart.
Miguel Gutierrez is a choreographer, composer, writer, and singer whose work, Age and Beauty Part 1, was presented in the 2014 Whitney Biennial. As with so many art ancestors, he knew, quote, about Wojnarowicz's writing for years before he actually read it, when Ralph Lemon assigned it to him to read aloud for a pre-show performance during Ralph's The Scaffold Room at the Kitchen.
Dennis Cooper is a writer of novels, poetry, journalism, theater, and film, whose most recent works are a feature film, Permanent Greenlight, made in collaboration with Zach Farley, and Zach's Coral Reef, a book of short fiction composed of animated GIFs. He was one of the first people to publish David Wojnarowicz's work in his literary zine, Little Caesar, and is honored to have called David a literary comrade and friend.
Karen Finley is an artist, author, and professor at NYU, whose latest performance and book is Grabbing Pussy. She was a friend of David Wojnarowicz's.
In closing, co-curator David Keel noted to me that it was Wojnarowicz's writings that really kept his legacy alive. In line with the themes of reading David Wojnarowicz, a few sentences for Wojnarowicz's Close to the Knives, a memoir of disintegration. Quote, "Bottom line, we have to find our forms of gesture and communication. You can never depend on the mass media to reflect us, or our needs, or our states of mind. Bottom line, with enough gestures, we can deafen and lift the curtains surrounding the control room." So with that, a few gestures as part of Memories That Smell Like Gasoline, reading David Wojnarowicz.
I had this extraordinary fear of finding out that I had this disease, and I didn't want to go get a test for many reasons. I mean, political reasons, as well as really I just didn't want to know that I was facing death. And yet the strain was unbelievable in comparison to once I crossed the line, and yes, I got a diagnosis.
Seeing myself sitting by an open window.
I went through various things.
There's something in my blood, and it's trying to fucking kill me. I feel so sick.
When they invented the wheel,
I feel like a homing bomb. Tick, tick, tick. I'm empty, other than illness and dark thoughts. I want to die, but I don't want to die. There's no answer right now. We are born into a pre-invented existence within a tribal nation of zombies.
they invented the TV and the darkness of what time leaves, and it is ironic body when he takes on the face of a family man who wants to protect his children. Because I am his child, and I have AIDS. And AIDS is used as a weapon to enforce restless waters filled with coasting images of sight and sound. Cars bucking over cobblestones down quiet side streets. Trucks waiting at corners with swarthy drivers leaning back in the cool, shadowy seats.
Too bad. can't see the virus in me.
Figures
Maybe it would rearrange something in him.
Far away
It certainly
sounds,
did in me
voices,
when I
and
found out I
cries
felt
and
this
horns
abstract
that roll up,
sensation.
then follow me,
Something like
like
pulling
some
off your
secret
skin and
ether.
turning it inside out and then rearranging it.
It's a pair of
so that
eyes
when you
looking
pull it
dreamily
back
up at the
on,
owner of
it
a
feels
fat
like what
dick.
it felt like before.
That's already sinking down
Only it
his
isn't,
throat. A
and
man
only
enters
you
the
know it.
basement
It's something
and walks
almost
over into my general
imperceptible.
direction,
I mean,
momentarily
the first
blinded
minute
by
after
the
being diagnosed, you are
monitor.
forever separated from what
And he
you
runs into
come
me.
to view as your
Before his
living
eyes, he
life.
just,
The world
instead of
outside
backing
the
up, he
eyes.
reaches out and pulls me into a
I
hug.
came
His arms
this
muscled
place
and hard.
within a day
His
or two of
embraces
death.
squeezing
And you would know
air
there was
from
an
my
epidemic.
lungs.
At least 40 people
I rub
exploring
my hands
bodily fluids.
over the surface of his body, his clothes, and an almost
When the original film was
dampness
transferred, it was
to his
jumping the
shirt.
sprockets of the
His
projector.
body
And now I'm watching that as fluctuates robotically
His
up and
lips
down.
grazing
But
my
only
neck,
from a
his hand
single
pulling his head
centimeter.
down so that he can softly bite the nape of my neck, dragging his tongue around up to my ear, down the lines of my throat, and my fingers are loosening his belt, and my hand slip through his open zipper into all that warmth inside his underwear and down his balls. And his
Shadows
hand is
casting
on the
their
back of my
bodies
neck
cancel
and
out
on
the
my
details
shoulders, and
necessary
he's
to make
pushing,
the
and I'm
visions
sinking
interesting.
down slow
Or
into a
decipherable
crouching
beyond the
position.
basics.
And from there,
The one who looks like he's praying at an altar
Slipping my
turns and
hands
opens his
beneath the edge
arm
of
mouth
his white
wide and
t-shirt.
gestures towards it. He nods at me, but I turn away.
When I put my hands on your body, on your flesh, I feel the history of that body. The beginning of its forming in the distant lake. Go all the way down. Feel the warmth and texture. And simultaneously I see the flesh. Wrapped in the layers of fat and disappear.
We are
I see the fat.
we wanna
they say cut back, we say fight back. Say cut back, we say fight back. I'll never be silent again. I'll never be silent again. Top back, top back.
They say cut
They
back.
say
world is watching.
don't
They say
fuck.
cut back, we say fight
We
back.
say fuck
They say
you.
cut back, we say
They
fight
say
back.
don't
They say
fuck.
cut back,
We
fight
say
back.
fuck you.
Act up.
They say don't fuck.
Fight back.
We say
Where
fuck
was
you.
George? History will
Fight it.
recall
They
Reagan
say
and
don't
Bush did
fuck.
nothing at
We
all.
say
George
fuck
Bush,
you.
can't hide. We
Quick.
charge
Act
you.
up.
Action.
Bring
Fight
it back
back.
to your door.
Fight AIDS.
Take it
Act
anymore.
up. Fight back. Fight AIDS.
Sometimes I come to hate people because they can't see where I am. I've gone empty, completely empty, and all they see is the visual form. My arms and legs, my face, my height and posture, the sounds that come from my throat. But I am fucking empty. The person I was just 1 year ago no longer exists.
I am an empty
Drifts spinning
stranger, a
slowly
carbon
into
copy
the
of my
ether
form.
somewhere way back there.
I can no longer find what I'm looking for outside of myself.
I can't
It doesn't
extract
exist out there.
my own
Maybe it's
dying
only
any
in here,
longer.
inside my
I am
head.
a stranger to others and to myself, and
But
I
my head
refuse
is
to
I'm a
claim
dark
that I'm
smudge in the
familiar
air that
or
When my
that
eyes
history
stop
attached
being
to my
cameras.
I feel like a window,
Tape is
maybe
right out
a
and
broken
nobody's words
window.
can touch me.
I am a glass
Empty
human.
No
glass.
gesture.
I am a
I
glass
see the world
human
spinning
disappearing in
behind
I've been
red.
dropped
I
into
see
all
casual
I am
from
standing
another
among
world.
all
I
of you,
can't
waving
see
my
just
invisible
any
arms and
longer.
hands.
See the
I am
signs
shouting
I
my
try
invisible
to
word.
with my
I'm a
hands.
complete stranger.
I'm getting so
fingers
weary.
moving
to you from
See the
here.
vague movement.
I am crawling
I
around
am
looking
moving.
for the aperture
I am
of
moving on
complete
two
and final
legs,
emptiness.
soon to be on all
See the
fours.
signs I try
vibrating
to
in
I am no
make
longer
isolation
with my
animal,
hands and my
vegetable, or
fingers.
mineral.
I am
I am
screaming,
no
See
longer
the
made of
vague
but it
circuits
comes
or
out like
discs.
pieces
On
of
my
clear
lips.
I am
ice.
no longer
weird.
coded.
Among the sheets.
I am signaling that
I'm
the volume
getting
of
so
all this
weary.
is too high. I am waving.
I am waving so
I am waving my
I am
hands.
waving
I am
my
getting
hands.
so weary.
I am disappearing.
We are disappearing.
I am disappearing, but not
We are
fast
disappearing.
We're
enough.
disappearing.
But not fast enough.
We are
Not fast
disappearing.
I am disappearing.
We are disappearing.
I'm disappearing.
Not fast enough.
But not fast enough.
When they invented the wheel, they invented the
I am so not technical. Okay, I do. Hello. I'm very honored to be here, and I hope that David Wojnarowicz's spirit comes to me tonight via you. I'm going to read from Close to the Knives, a memoir of disintegration. I had a hard time trying to pick, an appropriate section, but I hope you like this one. Journal excerpt. 2 centimeters beneath Johnny's curiosity about murder exists one of the sweetest heterosexual guys I've ever come into contact with. His intelligence and his fearless yes to everything reminds me of the intense friendships I had as a kid, when you think you'll know each other for the rest of your life and there is no such thing as death or danger. The world we create in a day's adventure exists outside the rest of the world, or else it seems as if the outside world participates in the adventure we're creating with our own actions and gestures and ideas, but somehow a transparent envelope of protection has opened up and we're traveling through it and doing what we want, and the world is surrounding the envelope, frozen and witnessing us for fractions of time, but unable to interfere or step through the invisible walls of the envelope, except to give us pizza or drive the subway train we're on. I love feeling invisible to the world when I want to walk through it or examine it. One weekend, we did peyote and went out to spend the day in the country. For us, the country is taking the tram out to Roosevelt Island and kicking around in the weeds and trees surrounding the abandoned insane asylum. We climbed what was left of the broken and decaying buildings, taking pictures of weird discards of civilization in the light of the chemical sunset. When it got too dark and silent, we headed back to the tram and then took the subway to Times Square. This is where it gets really weird. Saturday night on 42nd Street is a fish tank sensation of glittering streets swimming with what feels like too many people. But somehow it all fits together strangely. Angry drug dealers appearing out of the soup with magnified hands blurring in front of my face, and I can see each drop of sweat on this guy's forehead, even in the shadows, and the video trail of faces belonging to frozen ticket sellers in the dirty glass booths of movie houses, lobbies, with numbers relating to times of the slasher flicks and grade B science fiction movies playing double bill. I see my feet and they're rising and falling on the dark sidewalks, and then the jiggling motion of orange crush slushing around in the plastic tanks on the counter of some hot dog joint, and the wipe of a napkin over a tourist's face, looking kind of panicked at the roller coaster of flash sliding by and around him, and there's some spastic preacher screaming through a microphone plugged into a tiny, screechy pig amp, and my camera comes up periodically to my eye, and the whole scene is chopped down to a little rectangle, and the rectangle is filled with arms and legs and shiny pieces of automobile. The traffic is heavy and constant. There's a gray-faced pederast lurking in an entranceway on the sporting goods shop, trying to look nonchalant next to a deep-sea skin diver with a fucked-up mannequin face behind the snorkel glass mask, its nose all chipped off and lips broken, and the rectangle is moving, and faces loom up to it, till I just see an eyeball, and there's a breaking glass, and some wino is having a fit and throwing empty bottles at his demons. All the world is a sliding sensation, filled with things to buy and things bought, and groups of kids armed with carton cutters are spontaneously exploding away from an invisible radius spilling through the traffic, and cars are screeching, and buzz exhaust spitting in short bursts, and these kids are going to get something. What with the frightened tourist waving his hands in traffic, running up the middle dotted white line, the spinal cord of every road, and the rectangle comes down, and I realized I was so moved by the details, I forgot to take a picture. My hand feels like it is independent of me anyway. I wish I could pick up that guy's arm and examine the elaborate tattoos on his bicep and fingers, and I'm thinking of sex in the dirty sheets of the $10 hotel rooms. It's a one-way ride to my childhood, and it is touched off by that group of sailors, 3 of them, and I never did figure out what ship they got off of. It's definitely a foreign country, because nobody in America in their right mind would wear a hat like that with pom-poms waving in the breeze, and they walk through all this like an integral part of the picture. The rectangle is up and surrounding everything, even the spit and tin cans underfoot, and the fragments of moving arms and legs and face of a prostitute in the biggest wig I've ever seen, all flame red, and there's something in her eyes. It can only be a guy with all that makeup. And I think I recognize something like anger in those eyeballs. Don't you take no picture of me. And of course, I won't. I'm just part of the scenery, drifting by through a tiny window, and I see long legs and spiky boots and elegant high heels. And 3 prostitutes suddenly surround a businessman from the Waldorf, and they're saying, "Come on, honey," and rubbing his dick, rubbing his chest, kissing his neck, leaning in front of his face, murmuring sweet things. And his wallet appears behind the back in the hands of one of them, and they all drop away as he continues to giggle like a sex-mortified 5-year-old. And I remember the drug kits I saw being sold in that subway staircase. And what is all that racket? It's an ambulance stuck in the traffic, wailing away. My fucking ears hurt, and the psychedelic stuttering of light bulbs surrounding doorways and peep show entrances are tapping into my spine and my belly, and we're turning a corner. I keep getting frozen fragments of faces, and I, with all that language one could hear casting over its surface, and a neck I'd like to put my tongue to, and I'm amazed at how many different styles of shirts and pants and jackets and coats there are in the world. A hustler nods out against the wall among the huge rush of people exiting from the $3 movie, and he's squeezing his dick absent-mindedly, and I'm taking pictures which will never come out because of the light quality and the speed of the film. But the visions are so intense that till the day I die, I will always have these photographs in my brain. And suddenly, a face fills the rectangle, and it's so filled with hate and larceny. Let me hold that camera. That somewhere in the back of my etch-a-sketch brain, I realize there is danger. But the effects of the drugs make me feel that if the guy whips out a knife or throws a punch, It will take his arms an hour to travel the hundreds of miles of distance in order to connect with my belly or face. The drug-induced sensation of distance helps my body language emanate total fearlessness, which no one will bother to challenge. He was fearless in his artwork and in his activism, challenging and confronting the state. But I want to leave you with the last sentence in his memoir, one which is a wish and a mantra. And it's for all of us. Smell the flowers while you can. Thank you.
Hello all, I'm Camilo. You all look so handsome. I want to thank David for bringing us all together this evening. I learned of his work in 2010 when I was in my second year of art school, next to the critique classroom on the 7th floor of a building at Parsons on 16th Street and 5th Avenue, hung a silkscreen of David in a collaboration with James Rumberger and Margaret Van Cook and from 7 Miles a Second. And I remember going soon after to the library and looking up his work and found Close to the Knives and read it that whole summer. And 4 years later, in 2014, when my father journeyed to death because of cancer, I went back to Davis's writings on life and death, and I spent a lot of time at Fales with his journals, and what I'm going to be sharing today are 3 excerpts from his journals and some photographs from my encounter with those journals at Fales. And I'll start with an entry from September 27, 1981. David had just celebrated his 27th birthday, and earlier that year he had met Peter Hujar, and he writes the following after showing Peter his work. I've showed him much of my work, and his response has been one of disinterest, or at least of being mostly unaffected by my images. This causes me some sort of extreme discomfort. Last night, I left his place after using him in a 20-second segment of the heroin film that I've been making. I left his place and met later with Jesse and Brian, feeling a lot of anger at the state of my own art, feeling that I'm stuck in some sort of limbo with my work, feeling unencouraged, feeling that I'll never get anywhere with my stuff, as if it is quite meaningless to the people I most wanted to have meaning for. Feeling that as an artist or person who creates, that I'm basically a failure, that I haven't reached a sort of state that lets creative action be something that has an independent meaning, or is capable of affecting change in anyone other than friends. What does this mean? I simultaneously see the absurdity of this. Why would I want to affect change? Isn't that an impossible desire? Isn't change through action? Work an impossible thing to ask? What is it that I want to change? Maybe I want people to faint at the meaning of my work. What would that be like? Fainting through something not like fear or challenge, but through a sense of it being so true in this world as an independent existence. On Thanksgiving Day, on November 26, 1987, Peter Hujar died of AIDS-related complications. 3 days later, David attended a memorial service at St. Mark's Church for artist Keith Davis. And afterwards, David went to Peter's loft on 12th Street and 2nd Avenue with artist Kiki Smith. And the following is David's description of that evening. I asked Kiki to come back with me and dance. I wanted to show Peter's spirit some joy, some celebration. Kiki said it was still sprinkling a bit. We turned on a few lights in his place. Each time I come, a little less of him is there. I spread his photos on the bed, all his childhood history, from a tiny one pressed into a stamped brass frame, almost indistinct, of him at 7 or 9 years old, I can't tell, and one of him at 15. As I spread some of his history across the surface of the bed, with the candle in the shrine burning, I put on the record that Lynn found that we tried to use for his funeral mass. Tommaso Albinoni's Adagio in G minor. And Kiki and I tried to waltz. I felt so extremely fraught, self-conscious, trying to follow her simple foot movements. One large step sideways, 2 small movements of feet, 1 large again, turn, swing large, finally, we shut all the lights off, started the record again, and tried again. At times, my whole body disappointingly shut down. All emotions shut down. I wanted to dance so freely, but all this stuff of years circling over my shoulder. Finally, Kiki let go of my hands and started whirling in the space. I did the same. Dizzy from not eating all day, whirling and jumping, and driving through the darkness. The window curtains open, with the rain throwing through the street in huge sheets and veils across the downstairs theater lights. Her body whirling through the room. Her bare feet, my bare feet. Never any sense of collision, but sometimes dizziness, exploring the place with music, circling loud through the room. Street lamps burning, and the rain, and the rain, and the rain. And for a moment, everything went loose in my head. And I was beaming some kind of joy. And I was happy for him. Happy that he could be seeing this naive body starting to loosen this man and woman, whirling in an invisible flutter of cloth and feet. In an undated journal entry, but most probably from the mid-1980s, David writes about a conversation with an artist friend in which they discussed depression. And he says, "Look," I said, hugging her, "I don't understand why you people feel depressed. I've been walking around all day feeling extremely happy. I mean, there's so much great stuff in living. There's so much to see and do and feel great about. Thank you. Take it away. No, you do it. You do it well.
Hello. You can feel free to say hi back. Hello. Thank you. Appreciate it. I feel safer now. So I'm actually relatively new to David's work. I was just introduced maybe within the last year and a half. But what has, I guess, reverberated with me and has really stuck out is David was down with taking down the state and holding the state accountable, which is something that in my work I'm all for, in my life I'm all for. So that was super inspiring to see and to know lives elsewhere outside of me. So I'm going to share two pieces. The first is it here? Yeah. It's this is an installation from the Lazaretto, and it's an installation about the current status of the AIDS crisis. And basically, I'm reading the words that are on the walls. It's like a wall of a bedroom that he painted with this strong statement, declaration. I'm not sure exactly which one to call it, but yeah. We're living in a society that is accelerated to such a point that the person to press the button that releases warheads, the person who determines whether some of us have rights to abortion, the person who determines whether men can love men or women can love women, or whether I should have to die of lack of health, lack of access to health care because I'm Black, Hispanic, or poor and white, or Native American, that person no longer has to go to the scene of the crime to do their dirty work. The people making these determinations that affect our bodies and minds need only to do legislative paperwork. It's clean, efficient, and leaves no blood or fingerprints on or from the hands of those persons. The other piece of writing I'd like to share with you all is the last page and a half of this work called Postcards from America, X-Rays from Hell. Alex actually read the very last portion of this in the beginning, but I'd like to share just a larger segment. And basically what I love about this piece is that David really meditates on the importance of bringing the private to the public, right? And the importance of communal grieving and making that loud and seen. So this is just the last page and a half of this larger text. It doesn't just stop in images. Recently, a critic/novelist had his novel reviewed by the New York Times Book Review, and the reviewer took outrage at the novelist's descriptions of promiscuity, saying, "In this age of AIDS, the writer should show more restraint. Not only do we have to contend with bonehead newscasters and conservative members of the medical profession telling us to just say no to sexuality itself and talk about safer sex possibilities, but we have people from the thought police spilling out from the ranks with ammunitions that we shouldn't think about anything other than monogamous or safer sex. I'm beginning to believe that one of the last frontiers left for radical gesture is the imagination. At least in my ungoverned imagination, I could fuck somebody without a rubber, or I can, in the privacy of my own skull, douse him with a bucket of gasoline and set his putrid ass on fire, or throw Rep. William Danny than mayor off the Empire State Building. These fantasies give me distance from my outrage for a few seconds. They give me momentary comfort. Sexuality defined in images give me comfort in a hostile world. They give me strength. I've always loved my anonymity, and therein lies a contradiction because I also find comfort in seeing representations of my private experiences in the public environment. They need not to be representations of my experiences. They could be the experiences of and by others that merely come close to my own or else disrupt the generic representations that have come to be the norm in the various medias outside my door. I find that when I witness diverse representations of reality on a gallery wall or in a book or a movie or in spoken word or performance, that the more diverse the representation, the more I feel there's room in the environment for my existence, that not the entire environment is hostile. To make the private into something public is an action that has terrific repercussions in the pre-invented world. The government has a job of maintaining the day-to-day illusion of the one tribe nation. Each public disclosure of a private reality becomes something of a magnet that can attract others with a similar frame of reference. Thus, each public disclosure of a fragment of reality, of private reality, serves as a dismantling tool against the illusion of one tribe nation. It lifts the curtains for a brief peek and reveals the possible existence of literally millions of tribes. The term general public disintegrates. If general public disintegrates, what happens next is a possibility of an X-ray of civilization, an examination of its foundations. To turn our private grief at the loss of friends, family, lovers, and strangers into something public will serve as another powerful dismantling tool. It would dispel the notion that this virus has a sexual orientation, or the notion that the government and medical community has done very much to ease the spread or advancement of this disease. One of the first steps in making the private grief public is the ritual of memorials. I have loved the way memorials take the absence of a human being and make them somehow physical with the use of sound. I have attended a number of memorials in the last few years, and at the last one I attended, I found myself suddenly experiencing something akin to rage. I realized halfway through the event that I had witnessed a good number of the same people participating in other previous memorials. What made me angry was realizing that the memorial had little reverberation outside the room it was held in. A TV commercial for handy wipes, unfortunately, had a higher impact on the society at large. I got up and left because I didn't think I could control my urge to scream. There's a tendency for people affected by this epidemic to police each other, or prescribe what the most important gestures for dealing with this experience of loss would be. I resent that, and at the same time worry that friends will slowly become professional pallbearers, waiting for each death of their lovers, friends, and neighbors, and polishing their funeral speeches, perfecting their rituals of death rather than a relatively simple ritual of life, such as screaming in the streets. I feel this because of the urgency of the situation, because of seeing death coming in from the edges of abstraction where those with the luxury of time has cast it. I imagine what it would be like if friends had a demonstration each time a lover or friend or stranger died of AIDS. I imagine what it would be like if each time a lover, friend, or stranger died of this disease, their friends, lovers, or neighbors will take their dead body and drive it in a car 100 miles to Washington, D.C., and blast through the gates of the White House and come to a screeching halt before the entrance and then dump their lifeless forms on the front steps. It will be comforting to see those friends, neighbors, lovers, and strangers mark time and place in history in such a public way. But bottom line, this is my own feeling of urgency and need. Bottom line, emotionally, even a tiny charcoal scratching down as a gesture to mark a person's response to this epidemic means a whole world to me if it is hung in public. Bottom line, each and every gesture carries a reverberation that is meaningful in its diversity. Bottom line, we have to find our own forms of gesture and communication. You can never depend on the mass media to reflect us or our needs or our states of mind. Bottom line, with enough gestures, we can deafen the satellites and lift the curtains surrounding the control room. Thank you guys very much.
Good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. Tonight, I'm going to read 3 passages, and each of them is paired with an image. So, among the many things that I'm really struck and moved by is David's sort of rich and endlessly expansive interior life, which is very much intertwined with a highly social engagement, a political articulation, and the exploration of desire. So that's what these passages kind of point to. So the first one is, another thing is that it struck me how much has changed from the time during which he wrote and how much has stayed the same. So that's another thing I was thinking about. For example, this passage probably takes place somewhere right around here. That's the how much has changed. Okay. I leaned toward him, pushing him against the wall, lifting my pale hands up beneath his sweater, finding the edge of his tight t-shirt and peeling it upward. I placed my palms against the hard curve of his abdomen, his chest rolling slightly in pleasure. Moving back and forth within the tin-covered office cubicle, old soggy couch useless on the side, the carpet beneath our shifting feet reveals our steps with slight pools of water. We're moving around, changing positions that allow us to bend and sway and lean forward into each other's arms, so our tongues can meet with nothing more than a shy hesitation. He is sucking and chewing on my neck, pulling my body into his, and over the curve of his shoulder, sunlight is burning through a window emptied of glass. The frame still contains a rusted screen that reduces shapes and colors into tiny dots like a film directed by Seurat. Pushing and smoothing against the tides, this great dark ship with hundreds of portholes entered the film. His head was below my waist, opening his mouth and showing brilliant white teeth. He's unhooking the button at the top of my trousers. I lean down and find the neckline of his sweater and draw it back and away from the nape of his neck, which I gently probe with my tongue. In loving him, I saw a cigarette between the fingers of a hand, smoke blowing backwards into a room, and sputtering planes diving low through the clouds. In loving him, I saw men encouraging each other to lay down their arms. In loving him, I saw small-town laborers creating excavation that other men spend their lives trying to fill. In loving him, I saw moving films of stone buildings. I saw a hand in prison dragging snow in from the sill. In loving him, I saw great houses being erected that would soon slide into the waiting and stirring seas. I saw him freeing me from the silences of the interior life. So this is what stays the same. And I love this image so much. It should be like many more now than it was then. But these are strange and dangerous times. Some of us are born with the crosshairs of a rifle scope printed on our backs or skulls. Sometimes it's a matter of thought, sometimes activity, and most times it's color. I don't receive the proper kind of paycheck to take out a 70-year lease on my life. If I submit my gray cells to certain men and women in this country for total overhaul and redesign, I might have something called peace in my life. But what one sees if they look closely into the pupils of my eyes are a series of activities that are merely things that have occurred to me in the years of my childhood and teens. Others may be genetic, others a conditioning and response. But overall, I trust myself in a way no other could. If those cops had shown up in that moment I described above, I thoroughly believe that they have no right and their laws don't reflect me. It is easy for some in this country to be vicious and murderous when they have the support of rich white men and women in power. Those people consistently abstract human life and treat minorities as nothing more than clay pigeons at a skeet shooting range. They toss up a fake moral screen, nail it to the wall of a TV and a newscaster set, and unfurl it like a movie. These fake moral backdrops are conceived at will and displayed like artifacts of the human sensibility, as built by a caring God through millions of years. But the very same man who orders the death of journalists off the coast of Costa Rica as they are uncovering a story dealing with our government's profits to fund the Contras is the very same man who would stand on a studio set, airfield, White House garden, or convention podium and talk in the fake moral code about the humane and glorious designs he has planned for the social fabric of America if elected president. And the same man who stands before you at the altar of the church with 7 television cameras pointed at his face and talks about the sanctity of the fetus is the same man who kisses the hands of dictators in Central America. Dictators responsible for the pillaging of an entire country dissolving in poverty, as well as the murder of hundreds of thousands of people he perceives as disagreeing with his power structure. The rich have interchangeable heads, and their interpretations of law and religion are just as manufactured, false, interchangeable, and disposable as the fake moral screen. They have an entire media system to dispense manipulations of those scrambling for food and shelter and some illusion of security. Our borders are opening and closing to refugees of the countries our government pillages, based solely on whether or not those governments toe our party line. The U.S. uses its economic blockades to starve entire populations and accelerates people's death from malnutrition or collapsed medical care systems. The bureaucratic distancing technique in Washington, D.C. creates poverty and mass death in another region of the hemisphere and allows officials here to proclaim that the attacked country's political system is what made it fail. Because I am born into a created system of corruption does not mean I have to turn the other way when fake moral screens are unfurled. I am just as capable of creating my own moral contexts. And there's one more. The hand with the cigarette is slowly making its way back across the hip of the horizon. Its slow motion drift creates a dark spot below it, like a cloud shadow on a landscape that travels at the same speed. The hand with the cigarette is drifting for hours back to my waiting lips. What is it in these wrists that grab the steering wheel? What blood flows through these arms and hands? What color and sensibility in that blood? What textures and images are coded and locked into these genes, those cells, those bones that drag toward my eyes? What do these eyes have to do with surveillance cameras? What do the veins running through my wrists have in common with electric wiring? I'm the robotic kid with Caucasian kid programming, trying to short-circuit the sensory discs. I'm the robotic kid looking through digital eyes past the windshield into the pre-invented world. I'm the robotic kid gone haywire in the sudden mounds and coils of crazy cat landscapes. I'm the robotic kid lost for a fraction of evolutionary time in the outskirts of tribal boundaries. I have slipped through the keyhole of an enormous psychic erector set of child civilization. I am the robotic kid lost from the blind eye of government and wandering the edges of a computerized landscape. All civilization turning like one huge gear in my forehead. I am seeing my hands and feet grow thousands of miles long and millions of years old, and I am experiencing the exertion it takes to move these programmed limbs. I am the robotic kid, the human motor works, and surveying the scene before me, I wonder, what can these feet level? What can these feet pound and flatten? And what can these hands raise? Thank you.
Hi. Can we turn the lights on for the whole theater? Oh, thank God. This fucking reading aesthetics make me so tense. Yeah, it's like, okay. I would like to thank Alex and Megan for having me be part of this evening. It's amazing to be alongside these incredible artists, incredible to honor and listen to David's words. This is just my favorite image in the show. It has nothing to do with what I want to read today. I want to read from, also from Close to the Knives, from Do Not Doubt the Dangerousness of the 12-Inch Politician, which is a great essay. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to read part of it. But I wanted to try this experiment. So I was thinking a lot as people talk and seeing the show about the courage that it takes to speak out, the discomfort that it takes to do something that is not easy, and the kind of, and like the thing that takes over yourself to allow you to participate. And that's a big theme in my life. I have a tattoo that says participate. So I wondered if we could try a little experiment together as a room of making some sound together. So I was thinking we would start just like on like a ah together, and we'll do a little rehearsal, and you'll make an ah sound. You can stay in your chair, and then I'll just go like this. This will mean more volume, and then I'll go like this. It means stop. I'm like a chorus director. Can we just do a little experiment? Try first. Just go. That was really good. Can we do it again? And this time just do it for a long time, as comfortable as you feel to make sound, and breathe whenever you need to. And if you feel self-conscious, I just remind you that self-consciousness is an illusion. And some people who are no longer with us maybe never wanted to have to go out into the streets and fight for their lives or the lives of their friends. So the least we can do is maybe scream for them. So. More. More. Come on. More. If I say I'm homosexual or queer, does it make you nervous? I have experienced various reactions to that simple disclosure in the course of life. I often wonder whether my being a queer who asserts his sexual identity publicly makes some people see the word queer somehow written across my forehead in capital letters. And I wonder whether or not that revelation prevents some from hearing anything else I say, or whether or not it automatically discounts anything else I might say. Dismissal is policy in America. Our elected representatives have come up with a fail-safe system of symbols based on a prehistoric moral code built by other humans years, decades, or even many centuries ago. The moral code is chameleonic in nature. Its design changes and twists on whim by those who wield it. In this country, the elected representative has only to attach one of these symbols from the moral code to any social problem, and people who are not immediately affected by that problem feel safe and distanced. If there is homelessness in our streets, it is the fault of those who have no homes. They chose to live that way. If there is a disease such as AIDS, it is somehow the fault of those who contract that disease. They chose to have that disease. If 3 black men are shot by a white man on a subway train, somehow they chose to be shot by that man. And life goes on and on and on.
Most people tend to accept, at least outwardly, the system of the moral code and thus feel quite safe from any terrible event or problem such as homelessness or AIDS or non-existent medical care or rampant crime or hunger or unemployment or racism or sexism simply because they go to sleep every night in a house or apartment or dormitory whose clean rooms or smooth walls or regular structures of repeated daily routines provide them with a feeling of safety that never gets intruded upon by the events outside. There are scores of the population who either feel safe for the same reasons or else are too exhausted from trying to survive in this society by working dehumanizing jobs to keep a roof over their heads. Or else they feel safe because they are part of the structure that keeps the moral code intact. Or they feel safe only because once in a great while they can enter the illusion of the one tribe nation by stepping into a tiny curtained cubicle and pulling a metal lever that elects a 12-inch tall man or woman they saw for a short period of time transmitted across the boundaries of space into the antennae of their television screens. I grew up in a tiny version of hell called the suburbs and experienced the universe of the neatly clipped lawn. This is a place where anything and everything can and does take place, and events such as torture, starvation, humiliation, physical and psychic violence can take place uncontested by others as long as it doesn't stray across the boundaries and borders as formed by the deed holder inhabiting the house on the neatly clipped lawn. If the violence is contained within the borders of the lawn and does not mess up the real estate in any way that would cause the surrounding property's devaluation, anything is possible and everything permissible. I had a father who brutalized his first and second wives with physical violence. Any sign of life from the family he supported with his paycheck from his job as a sailor was met with extreme violence. In my home, one could not laugh, one could not express boredom, one could not cry, one could not play, one could not explore, one could not engage in any activity that showed development or growth that was independent. I remember the first time I discovered the forests that grew in the distances from my neighbors' houses. Once I discovered the universe of the forests and lakes, I went there whenever possible. In the universe of the forest, I didn't think about the universe of the neatly clipped lawn. I didn't think of what it felt like as a 5 or 6-year-old being dragged down the basement stairs and having my head and body hit with a dog chain or a sawed-off chunk of 2x4. I didn't think of my father picking up my sister and slamming her down on a sidewalk in front of our home in one neighborhood. And I didn't think of the brown stuff that came out of my sister's ears and mouth. And I didn't think of the neighbors mowing their lawns and watering their flower gardens without missing a beat when my father did these things. In the forests, I made human forms out of mud and sticks. When they dried, they fell apart, or I would throw them against tree trunks. I climbed trees and smoked pilfered cigarettes until I got so dizzy I would almost fall out of the branches. I found giant birds' nests I could only assume were made by eagles. Or maybe it's just a matter of perspective. When one is small, many things look relatively monumental. As one grows older, things tend to look less monumental, and things looking less monumental doesn't always have to do with vision. It can be affected by thought processes and analysis. As I grow older, my father looks less monumental, both because he is dead now. He hung himself in the basement of his home about 14 years ago. And because I can see and understand a little better his humanity and his demons. And he looks less monumental because I speak of him and bring the fear-charged memories of him outside my head and make them public. Sound is so interesting this way. Words are so interesting this way. Words can strip the power from a memory or an event. Words can cut the ropes of an experience. Breaking silence about an experience can break the chains of the code of silence. Describing the once indescribable can dismantle the power of taboo. To speak about the once unspeakable can make the invisible familiar if repeated often enough in clear and loud tones. To speak of ourselves while living in a country that considers us or our thoughts taboo is to shake the boundaries of the illusion of the one tribe nation. To keep silent is to deny the fact that there are millions of separate tribes in this illusion called America. To keep silent even when our individual existence contradicts the illusory one tribe nation is to lose our own identities. Bottom line, if people don't say what they believe, those ideas and feelings get lost. If they are lost often enough, those ideas and feelings never return. This was what my father hoped would happen with his actions towards any display of individuality. And this is the hope of certain government officials and religious leaders as well. When I make statements like this, I do not make them lightly. I make them from a position of experience, the experience of what it is to be homosexual in this country, what it is to be a man who is capable of loving men physically and emotionally. Judge Jack Hampton is a judge from Houston, Texas, and although I live in New York, I know who this man is because about a year ago, an 18-year-old guy was convicted of shooting to death 2 men who happened to be homosexuals. He was given a life sentence in prison for these shootings. Judge Jack Hampton of Houston, Texas, reduced this guy's life sentence to 30 years solely because his victims were homosexual. Judge Jack Hampton said he didn't think homosexuals should be on the streets and that he also didn't think it would hurt his chances for re-election as judge if he said that he believed 2 men's lives were worth a whole lot less because they loved men. He asked only that the journalist he spoke to that day spell his name right. Jackhampton. He also said he would be hard put to convict someone who dragged prostitutes into the woods and shot them dead. Judge Jack Hampton of Houston, Texas, is just a pimple on the face of a society that suffers from what I consider to be an extreme disease. A disease that shows itself in the prevalence of fear of diversity and is characterized by various symptoms. Among them are sweating palms, angry outbursts, hysteria, the discharging of handguns, the passing of certain legislation, the invasion of foreign countries, the burning down of homes, the running out of town, and ultimately the legalized murder of those who are diverse in their natures. Thanks.
Can you make the lights go normal again? Thank you. My arm was turning green and black. All I can remember from my flirting with heroin is the problem I had keeping myself from throwing up each time I did it. Normally, after a week or 2 of doing it on a daily basis, I'd imagine that I wouldn't be wasting what little money I had on bending over the curb between parked cars and trying to discreetly empty out my guts onto the asphalt, which appeared in some sort of magnified state with each fragment of garbage and wrapper and dog shit and scraping and bottle cap. Somebody had given me a number of fresh hypodermics, and for a while they made me happy and focused on something outside the black cloud of depression that seemed to swallow the streets outside my door every time I left the house to go do the meaningless work, routine, or buy food. I lived in a shitty 1-room apartment in the back of a building on East 4th Street. My back window had a view of the shower room of the firehouse on 3rd Street, where occasionally I would watch some sexy fireman step out of a shower stall and dry his body off and put on each article of civilian clothing he kept in a neatly folded pile on a ledge behind the window. There were a couple of weed trees that were about 4 stories tall that waved between the brick walls of my building and the firehouse. I literally felt I was at the end of my life. Existence seemed like a bad series of routines that led to nothing I cared about. Ever since I was a kid, I couldn't shake the realization that life was essentially a series of activities designed so that one could pay out money to keep from dying. If one stopped paying, one died, whether from exposure, starvation, lack of medical care, or invisibility. I fixed myself a shot and went out for a walk and got about 7 blocks when I started puking. I had to stop about 5 times on each block to spew out water between parked autos. My eyes were tearing up, and the city streets expanded and contracted till they became tunnel-like and brilliant with sunlight bouncing off the edges. I went home and lay down on the mattress. It was like a cave, all dark and cool, while outside the brick wall was glowing with sunlight and the whispering shadows of a breeze-tossed tree. I saw a series of transparent images appear in the air, halfway between my face and the windows, almost like a slide projector carousel clicking away. First, a series of physics equations, and then a Donald Duck no more than 5 inches tall, looking at me with his quacky smile. I leaned over the side of the bed and threw up into the waste paper can I'd placed there. Then I felt warm, like my bones were resting in a bathtub full of almost hot water. Then I went unconscious. Later, in a restaurant with Peter Hujar, having a cup of coffee, I showed him my arm. It felt foreign to me, like an arm out of a monster movie that belonged to somebody else. I felt like a long-distance scientist showing another scientist a weird animal relic. I was almost completely disassociated from myself. Peter looked at me with an odd look in his eyes and said, "Don't ever come over to my house again. I won't be friends with you if you're going to do that." I burst into tears. "I just feel so terrible about living," I said. "I feel too self-conscious about living and it's driving me crazy." He reached over and rubbed my arm. I went home later and never did it again. It took a number of months for the grainy black pall to lift from the surfaces and activities around me. It never lifted completely, but I realized that would never happen unless the entire society stopped dead in its tracks and the direction it was speeding in got erased. Thanks.
Thank you for this evening to have us all come here together and read from David's work. And so I want to thank Visual Aids and the Whitney and everyone involved. And I would also like to thank the audience for coming here today, because without you being here, it just wouldn't be the same, right? We'd just be in our kitchens just being here and doing that. Sometimes I do that, but an aesthetic note, because that came up. I just really have loved all of the readings here, and I want to tell all of the artists how much I was so moved by the readings to the point of tears, because as a friend of David's, it's on this other level where you knew the person in a very intimate way, and then you're hearing their words. And sometimes, for me, that space between the sorrow and the public is a place where I am right now. So I have chosen this work, one day this kid will get larger. And I love the fact that I'm wearing also black and white to go along with it. And I was so sad because I was putting the makeup on in the car and it splurred all over. But then I remembered, oh, I've got the jacket. So I like to think that David would appreciate that. So that's what I'm just so happy about. So I'm not embarrassing myself in this moment. And the other thing that I struggle with that I have to say is, and I so meaning to be saying here is just that AIDS still exists, HIV still exists, and I want us all to be remembering that the beauty of this exhibit for us not to forget the reality of what is happening here in the world today. One day this kid will get larger. One day this kid will come to know something that causes a sensation equivalent to the separation of the earth from its axis. One day this kid will reach a point where he senses a division that isn't mathematical. One day this kid will feel something stir in his heart and throat and mouth. One day this kid will find something in his mind and body and soul that makes him hungry. One day this kid will do something that causes men who wear the uniforms of priests and rabbis, men who inhabit certain stone buildings, to call for his death. One day, politicians will enact legislations against this kid. One day, families will give false information to their children, and each day, each child will pass the information down generationally to their families. And that information will be designed to make existence intolerable for this kid. One day this kid will begin to experience all this activity in his environment, and that activity and information will compel him to commit suicide or submit to danger in hopes of being murdered or submit to silence and invisibility. Or one day this kid will talk. And when he begins to talk, men who develop a fear of this kid will attempt to silence him with strangling, fists, prison, suffocation, rape, intimidation, drugging, ropes, guns, laws, menace, roving gangs, bottles, knives, religion, decapitation, and immolation by fire. Doctors will pronounce this kid curable, as if his brain were a virus. This kid will lose his constitutional rights against the government's invasion of his privacy. This kid will be faced with electroshock, drugs, and conditioning therapies in laboratories tended by psychologists and research scientists. He will be subject to loss of home, civil rights, jobs, and all conceivable freedoms. And all this will begin to happen in 1 or 2 years when he discovers he desires to place his naked body on the naked body of another boy.
If I had $1 to spend for healthcare, I'd rather spend it on a baby or innocent person with some defect or illness, not in their own responsibility, not some person with AIDS, says a healthcare official on national television. And this is in the middle of an hour-long video of people dying on camera because they can't even afford the limited drugs available that might extend their lives. And I can't even remember what this official looked like because I reached into the fucking TV screen and ripped his face in half. And I was diagnosed with ARC recently, and this was after the last few years of losing count of the friends and neighbors who have been dying slow, vicious, unnecessary deaths because fags and dykes and junkies are expendable in this country. They're expendable. If you want to stop AIDS, shoot the queers, says the governor of Texas on radio. And his press secretary later claims that the governor was only joking and didn't know the microphone was turned on. Besides, he didn't think it hurt his chances for re-election anyways. And I wake up every morning in this killing machine called America, and I'm carrying this rage like a blood-filled egg, and there's a thin line between the inside and outside, a thin line between thought and action, and that line is simply made up of blood and muscle and bone. And I'm waking up more and more from daydreams of tipping Amazonian and blow darts and infected blood and spitting them at the exposed necklines of certain politicians or government healthcare workers, or those thinly disguised walking swastikas that wear religious garments over their murderous intentions, or those rabid strangers parading against AIDS clinics in the nightly news suburbs. And there's a thin line, a very thin line between the inside and the outside. And I've been looking all my life at these fucking signs surrounding us in the media or on people's lips, the religious types outside St. Patty's, during the gay parade shouting the men and the women, you won't be here next year, you'll get AIDS and die, haha. And the areas of the USA where it's possible to murder a man, and when brought to trial, one only has to say that the victim was a queer, and they try to touch you, in the courts to set you free. And the difficulties that a bunch of Republican senators have in Albany with supporting an anti-violence bill that includes sexual orientation as a category of crime victims. There's a thin line, a very thin line. Thin line as each T cell disappears from my body, it's replaced by 10 pounds of pressure, 10 pounds of rage, and I focus that rage into nonviolent resistance, but the focus is starting to slip. The focus is starting to slip. My hands are starting to move independent of self-restraint, and the egg is starting to crack. America seems to understand and accept murder as a self-defense against those who would murder other people. And it's been murder. It's been murder on a daily basis for 8 long years. And we're expected to pay taxes to support this public and social murder. And we're expected to quietly and politely make house in this windstorm of murder. But I say there's certain politicians that better increase their security forces. There's certain religious leaders and healthcare officials that had better get bigger fucking dogs and higher fucking fences and more complex security alarms for their homes. And queer bashers better start doing the work from inside howitzer tanks, because that thin line between the inside and outside is beginning to erode. And at the moment, I'm a 37-foot tall, 1,172-pound man inside his 6-foot body. And all I can feel is the pressure. All I can feel is the pressure and the need for release.